The Senate Judiciary Committee hearing room was packed to the rafters, every seat filled. Every camera lens focused on the long mahogany table where the next viral political moment was about to unfold. The air was thick with anticipation, the kind that makes even seasoned reporters sit up straighter. Senator Lindsey Graham, the 68-year-old Republican from South Carolina, was in his element. He leaned into the microphone, a familiar Southern drawl in his voice, a smirk playing on his lips. Across from him sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, a 42-year-old freshman from Texas, her maroon suit sharp under the studio lights, her expression unreadable. She was a former public defender, a woman who had spent her career fighting for people the system forgot. And tonight she was about to make history. Graham's reputation preceded him. For 2 decades, he'd been the Senate's master of the gotcha moment, the king of the sound bite, the man who could make even the most seasoned witnesses squirm. He was known for his charm, his wit, and his ability to turn a hearing into a headline. But tonight, he was up against someone different. Crockett wasn't a career politician. She was a fighter, a strategist, and most importantly, she had come prepared. The hearing was supposed to be a routine debate on the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. But everyone in the room knew it was more than that. For Graham, it was about defending the status quo, about states' rights and constitutional tradition. For Crockett, it was personal. She had seen voter suppression up close in her Texas community. She had watched polling places close, lines grow longer, and voters turned away for reasons that had nothing to do with fraud, and everything to do with power. Graham started with his trademark condescension. "Miss Crockett," he began, "perhaps you need a lesson on how government works, since you seem confused about basic constitutional principles." The room fell silent. You could hear the click of a camera shutter, the shuffle of a notepad. Crockett didn't flinch. She reached for a folder beside her, her movements slow and deliberate. Inside were documents, charts, and unbeknownst to Graham, receipts that would soon turn the tables. Graham pressed on, confident. "You keep talking about voter suppression, but voter turnout in Texas increased in the last election. How can you claim suppression when more people are voting?" He leaned back, clearly pleased with himself. Several Republican senators nodded in agreement. Certain he had the upper hand, Crockett opened her folder and pulled out a document. "Senator Graham, I'm glad you mentioned turnout numbers. Are you familiar with what political scientists call the determination factor?" Graham's smile faltered. This wasn't the response he had anticipated. "I'm not here for a lecture, Miss Crockett," he said, a hint of irritation in his voice. "Oh, this isn't just academics, Senator," Crockett replied, her voice clear and steady. "This is real. The determination factor shows that when voters face obstacles, those who overcome them are more motivated than average. High turnout in the face of suppression doesn't mean suppression isn't happening. It shows that people are fighting even harder to make their voices heard." She held up a chart. In Texas, voters in minority districts waited an average of 6 hours to vote. 6 hours, Senator. In predominantly white districts, the wait was only 45 minutes. People stood in line for 6 hours because they were determined to vote despite the obstacles. That's not freedom, Senator. That's obstruction. Graham shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable. Being lectured, especially by a freshman congresswoman, was not part of his plan. He tried to regain control. "Well, Miss Crockett, if you studied the Constitution as much as I have, you'd know states have the right to manage their own elections. It's called federalism. Maybe law school didn't cover that thoroughly for you?" The audience gasped at the personal jab. Graham was attempting to embarrass her, reminding everyone who was the experienced statesman and who was the newcomer, but Crockett didn't flinch. Instead, she smiled, not nervously, not politely, but knowingly, like a strategist watching her opponent step right into a trap. "Actually, Senator Graham, I am very familiar with federalism. I'm also very familiar with the 15th Amendment, which you seem to have overlooked. Would you like me to remind you what it says?" Without waiting for a reply, she continued, "The right of citizens to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. And here's the part you may have forgotten. Congress shall have the power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. That's not states' rights, Senator. That's a federal constitutional mandate. But you already know that, right? Graham was flustered. His usual tactics weren't working. He tried a dismissive, humorous approach. Oh, Miss Crockett, quoting the Constitution at me like I haven't read it 1,000 times. I was a military lawyer. I've forgotten more constitutional law than most people ever learn. He chuckled, glancing at his Republican colleagues for support. Some laughed, but it sounded forced. Crockett leaned forward, calm and confident. You know what, Senator? You're right. You've forgotten a lot. Would you like me to remind you of a few things you might have overlooked? She pulled out another document and Graham's eyes narrowed. Senator Graham, on March 15, 2006, you gave a speech on this very floor. Do you remember what you said about voting rights? Graham waved his hand dismissively. I've given thousands of speeches. I can't remember them all. Let me refresh your memory, Crockett said, reading from the document. Voting is the most fundamental right in a democracy. Any attempt to make voting harder for American citizens is an attack on democracy itself. We must be vigilant against any effort to suppress the vote, whether it comes from the left or the right. The room went silent. Even Republican colleagues looked uneasy. Crockett continued, That was you, Senator. Your words. So, what changed? Why were voting rights so critical in 2006, but not now? Graham's face turned red. He hadn't expected her to bring out his old quotes, and his staff hadn't prepared him. That's a completely different issue, he sputtered, trying to deflect. You're taking my words out of context. Am I? Crockett asked innocently. I have the full transcript here. Would you like me to read the entire speech? I have time. Graham's voice rose. This is ridiculous. You're playing gotcha politics instead of focusing on real issues. Crockett remained calm, which only made Graham seem more unhinged. Senator, there's no issue more real than protecting the right to vote. You've said it yourself multiple times. She pulled out another paper. On June 22, 2013, you told Fox News, voter ID laws are common sense. We need to ensure only legal citizens vote, but every legal citizen must be able to vote. It's a balance. Then on August 9, 2015, you tweeted, making people wait hours to vote is un-American. We need more polling places, not fewer, and another one, Crockett continued, pulling out another quote. On October 30, 2020, you told CNN, if we make voting too hard, we're no better than the dictatorships we criticize. With each quote she presented, Graham sank a little lower in his chair. His staff behind him frantically scrolled through their phones, searching for a response, but came up empty. Just when it seemed like Crockett had delivered enough powerful blows, she revealed she was just getting started. But Senator Graham, she said, I haven't even reached the most interesting part yet. I didn't just research your public statements. I studied your voting record, and it tells a very different story. Graham's instincts as a lawyer kicked in. What are you implying, Miss Crockett? I'm not implying anything, Senator, she replied calmly. I'm stating facts. In 2006, when Republicans controlled Congress, you voted yes to expand voting access. In 2008, with Democrats in power, you voted no on the exact same provisions. 2014, Republican control again, you voted yes. 2021, Democratic control, you voted no. She held up a chart showing his voting pattern. Your support for voting rights appears to change depending on which party benefits. That's not principle, Senator. That's politics. The Democrats in the room tried not to smile. The Republicans looked uncomfortable. Graham looked as though he had been hit by a truck. He attempted to regain composure and straightened his tie. Miss Crockett, you can cherry-pick quotes all day, but this bill is federal overreach. States know best how to run their own elections. Crockett had been waiting for this moment. She pulled a thick manila envelope from her folder. Senator Graham, let's talk about South Carolina, your home state, the state you represent, the state where you've won election after election. Let's look at how elections are actually run there. She opened the envelope and pulled out a map. This is South Carolina's voting map from 2020. Notice anything unusual? The map showed dozens of red dots concentrated in certain areas with large, empty spaces elsewhere. Those red dots represented polling places that closed between 2018 and 2020, concentrated in Columbia, Charleston, and Greenville, the areas with the highest black populations. Graham started to respond, but Crockett raised a hand. "I'm not finished, Senator." She pulled out another document. This report from the South Carolina Election Commission shows that in majority black precincts, there was one polling place per 3,847 registered voters. In majority white precincts, one per 1,123 voters. The math is simple and damning. Black voters had to compete with 3 times as many people for access to polling places. Crockett's voice strengthened. These closures happened after the Shelby County v. Holder decision in 2013, which removed federal oversight for states with histories of discrimination. You celebrated that decision, didn't you? Graham's mouth opened and closed, speechless. Crockett wasn't done. She had saved her most powerful point for last. "Senator Graham, meet Miss Dorothy Williams. She's 73, lives in Richland County, South Carolina, your constituent. She has voted in every election since 1968, in 2018. She walked 4 blocks to vote as she always did. But in 2020, her polling place was closed. The nearest one was 7 miles away. She doesn't drive. The bus doesn't go there. So she had to pay $42 for an Uber, basically a poll tax. She did it because voting mattered. How many others couldn't afford to do the same?" She pulled out another photo. Mr. James Patterson, 28, construction worker from Orangeburg County. He arrived at his polling place at 6 a.m. before work. The line was already 3 hours long. He had to choose between voting and feeding his 3 children. He chose his job. And Ms. Maria Santos, 34, nurse from Greenville. She worked a 12-hour shift and got to the polls at 6:30 p.m. The line was still 2 hours. The polling place closed while she waited. She was told she could vote provisionally. But provisional ballots in South Carolina are rejected 3 times as often as regular ballots. With each story and photo, the room grew quieter. Even some Republican senators shifted uncomfortably. "These are your people, Senator," Crockett said. "The people you swore to represent. The people whose right to vote you once said was fundamental and sacred." "So I'll ask again, what changed?" Graham's face had gone from red to pale. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for his water glass. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost all confidence. You don't understand the complexities," he stammered. "I understand perfectly." Crockett interrupted, standing confidently. "I understand that when it's politically convenient, you support voting rights. When it's not, you don't. I understand that you're willing to make it harder for your own constituents to vote if it helps your party stay in power. I also understand that you thought you could embarrass me today. You thought lecturing me about the Constitution and federalism would make me look foolish. Instead, you've shown everyone watching exactly who you really are." As she packed up her folder, Crockett delivered one last devastating point. "Oh, and Senator Graham, that comment about studying the Constitution longer than I've been alive? I'm 42 years old. You earned your law degree in 1981. That's 42 years ago. So, technically, I've been alive exactly as long as you've been studying the Constitution. The difference? I actually remember what I've learned." The audience couldn't help themselves. People laughed out loud, and even some Republicans covered their mouths to hide their smiles. Graham sat defeated. His plan to humiliate the freshman congresswoman had backfired spectacularly. Instead of making her look inexperienced, she had exposed him as a hypocrite whose principles changed with political convenience. "Senator Graham," the committee chair finally broke the silence. "Do you have a response?" Graham mumbled something about reviewing the data and moved on to the next witness. But everyone in the room knew what had happened. The senior senator had tried to outsmart the freshman representative and failed. What Graham didn't realize was that the entire exchange had been live-streamed. Within minutes, clips were shared across social media. The hashtag Crockett Destroys Graham began trending. The moment she said, "I actually remember what I've learned," quickly became a viral meme. News outlets ran headlines like Freshman Representative Jasmine Crockett fact-checks, Lindsey Graham and Graham attempts to school Crockett on Constitution, gets schooled instead. Political commentators had a field day. This is what happens when you underestimate your opponent. One analyst said on CNN, Graham thought he was dealing with a rookie. He didn't do his homework. Crockett came prepared for war. Within hours, the video had been viewed over 10 million times across multiple platforms. Hashtag Crockett Destroys Graham wasn't just trending, it became the #1 trend worldwide. But this was more than just a viral moment. It was a political earthquake. Graham's office was flooded with calls, not only from critics, but from his own constituents, including many people Crockett had mentioned in her hearing. Dorothy Williams, the 73-year-old voter who had to pay for an Uber to cast her ballot, became an overnight sensation after posting on Facebook. "Thank you, Representative Crockett, for telling my story. Senator Graham has never once asked me about my voting experience." The South Carolina chapter of the NAACP immediately called for town halls to discuss voting access. Local news stations began investigating polling place closures. Suddenly, people everywhere wanted answers about why their polling locations had been shut and who made those decisions. Graham attempted damage control. The next day, he went on Fox News, his usual comfort zone, expecting soft questions, but even the hosts couldn't ignore what had happened. "Senator, she had your own quotes. How do you explain the inconsistency?" they asked. Graham tried his standard deflection. "This is just Democrats playing politics. They want to federalize elections to win more seats." But it fell flat. Viewers online commented that Graham looked defensive and couldn't answer why he had changed his position on voting rights. Other Republican senators started distancing themselves. Senator Susan Collins said to reporters, "I believe voting rights are important for all Americans." Senator Mitt Romney added, "We should make voting accessible while also secure." Meanwhile, Crockett became a Democratic superstar overnight. She appeared on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, receiving a standing ovation just for walking out on stage. "I wasn't trying to go viral," she said with a smile. "I was just standing up for voting rights." Behind her calm demeanor, Crockett knew exactly what she had accomplished. She had proven that the new generation of Democratic leaders wouldn't be pushovers. They would come armed with facts, evidence, and courage to challenge entrenched power. 6 months later, the effects were still evident. The John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, once considered stalled, became a topic of discussion in political science classes, debate teams, and activist trainings. Instructors emphasized that winning political arguments isn't about loud voices or big titles. It's about preparation and irrefutable facts. Jasmine Crockett demonstrated that with determination. Preparation and the facts on your side, you can challenge even a senior senator who thinks he's untouchable. She reminded the nation that democracy works best when elected officials are held accountable for their words and actions.